Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time we're going to be taking a look at building a couple of components that we would commonly see in sort of RPG style games. So we're going to be building up a setup for having our character be able to earn experience points, which then gains them levels. And then we're also going to be related to that, setting up a couple of things so that they can have stats that change as they level up. And we're going to set that up in a way so that those stats could also take into account things like equipment, they could have temporary buffs, things like that. So the focus is going to be really on the underlying architecture for it, so that this is something where if you've already got an existing game, you could potentially slot it into that. So there's not going to be too much of a focus on, the user interface, things like that. We'll set up some basic parts so we can see what's happening, but the focus is really going to be on those core systems. So let's dive on in. So if we think about the design for this, we need to be able to gain experience points, and we need to be able to map that to a level. Now there's a lot of different ways that we could do that mapping, and what it comes down to is how do we want the game to feel for the player? So you will often see ones where the very early levels you very rapidly gain experience points, and those sort of you build up levels really quickly. So the amount of experience needed to level is quite low. And then as you get to higher levels, it takes a lot more. So that's something that's fairly common. There's a lot of different ways that we could approach it. So it depends upon how you want things to feel for the player. Do you want it to always feel like leveling up is about the same amount of effort? Do you want it to feel easier at the start and more challenging at the end? How do you want those to function? So I want to set up that mapping from experience points to level such that we can easily swap in other ones. So that, because this is something where it's not uncommon that we might need to change that. You might want to have different things for different characters. You might need to rebalance it. So we want to make it that it's as flexible as possible for us. So I'm going to set up our initial folder for our RPG components. And I'm going to set up a folder for our scripts. And we're going to have quite a few different ones. So we're going to have one on the character that's actually keeping track of the experience points. So XP tracker. So that'll be the interface we use for gaining experience points, for changing level, stuff like that. We're then also going to have our mapping. So our system that converts from experience points to a level. And we want this to be able to have different ones that we can substitute in. So I'm going to make this be a scriptable object, and I'm going to set this up with a viewpoint of it has a base one, and then we have things that inherit from that. So what I'm going to set up is, I'll refer to it as XP translation. And this one is going to be our base version of that. And then we'll set up a simple one, once it lets me rename the files, XP translation, and we might set up one where it is going to be, let's say that it uses a preset table. So that's something where it has, okay, you put in specific values of level 1 is this amount of experience, level 2 is this, so it's a very sort of fixed amount. Then I want to also set up an XP translation, and we can make one that it's just a linear equation essentially. So, okay, that gives us a good bunch of ones to now set up. So now let's actually create these. And we'll start to populate these and set them up the way that we want them to actually be working. So the base XP one is where I will start with, because this is one that it's important we get this interface sort of set up. So it's going to be a scriptable object. But we are going to mark this as an abstract class. We don't want someone creating the base version of it. And what I want to have is, so it's going to need to keep track of the experience points. So public int current XP. So that can be publicly gettable, but a protected set. And we'll default that to 0. Number types or variable types we use here are something that's important. We probably don't want something like a float or a double, a decimal type probably isn't the ideal we want here. Using something like an integer allows us to go up to pretty large values. We could also use a uint because we don't have negative amounts of experience, but we would be subtracting from it at times. So I think it's useful just to stick with a signed integer. Then, okay, we want something that keeps track of our current level. Again, we want to have that be protected set. And we start at level 1. So that looks good. We've got those. We want to have a thing for gaining experience points. So public void gain, or we can refer to this as add XP, and an amount. Now with that, it could be useful to have this tell us if they gained a level or not. There's different ways we could approach this. We could have it that it returns a true or false when you've gained a level. Could also have it that we could supply a function that it runs if you've gained a level. It's different ways that we could go about setting this up, and it really depends upon how we want to approach doing this. I am going to say that it has to return a Boolean. So true if you've gained a level, false if you haven't gained a level. So that looks pretty good. I think it would also be useful to have a function that does a set level, so that if we need to, we can actually go and retrieve back and just see, okay, what is actually, well, so that we can just start at level 10, for example. That looks pretty good. It would also be really, really, really handy to know how many XP do we need to get to the next level. So that's the other thing that would be useful to have here. And this is something where, okay, we know our current XP, we know the current level. What I would like to be able to say is XP required for next level. Now this one is potentially a little bit of a trickier one for us working out. That's one that we probably need to actually turn into it calling a function. So that's something where we are going to have to implement this. We want to think about how we want this to work, because that's going to need to run stuff from the base. It's not going to be able to access sort of the core variables here, and not going to give us the information we need, but it'd still be really nice to have this be a property. Would be really handy. So what I'm going to do is have a protected abstract int get XP required for next level. Then we can run that function. That way we've presented as a property. We mandate that the child classes have to implement it, but we provide that sort of nicer interface for it. So that's good. Probably also useful to have a thing saying, can we actually level up? Or are we at the level cap? At level cap. So that looks good. Can default that to false. Good. So now we can start to set up our particular ones here. So our translation table one, well, we're going to set up a create asset menu first. So we set up our menu name. So we'll refer to this as RPG XP table. And the file name, we can refer to this as XP translation table, like that. So now we need to, because we have an abstract class, we can see we get all these errors, but if we go to show potential fixes, we can tell it, okay, implement abstract class, it'll set up the ones that we need, which is really handy. Now the translation table needs to store, here is a level, here is the corresponding experience points for it. So what we could do is, I could do like a list of a vector to int, but that's a little bit, with things listed as x and y, not particularly great. What I could do, ideally, is I want to have a class, so XP translation table entry, and I want to have public int for level, and a public int for XP required. So then I have to mark this as system.serializable. But then what I can do here is a serialized field list XP translation table entry, and then I can have the table. So now I can actually go and figure out these different setups here. So, okay, well, I could go and work out our, current XP, things like that. But we also, these are being properties, so those won't get serialized, which is good. So we just want to double check that, because scriptable objects, you want to be careful what stuff does get serialized and what stuff doesn't. So, okay, when this gets created, the level will already be set up as 1. So all of those are good. So then when we go and add XP, if we start looking at how that's going to look. So what we would do is our current XP, we would add to that the amount. And then we need to go and check, because we also could be at our level cap. So we would actually check first, am I at the level cap? If I am, return false, so that there's nothing to do. Otherwise, we update the current XP, then we go and check in that translation table to see what level we should now be at. So we can go for each var entry in table, if current XP is greater than or equal to the entry's XP required. So we've found the level that we should be in. And then what we can do is see, okay, well, what we return would be based upon whether we are at the level cap now, or actually what we would return based on whether our level's changed. So we can check and see, well, okay, if entry level is not equal to our current level, then that means we have gone up. So we would return true. Current level would become entry level. So found the new level, or level change would actually be a better description. So we found a matching entry. This does mean those entries need to be sorted. So that's something that when they're being entered, it'll be important to list them in order. We'd expect that that is naturally how people would enter them, but is something just to be aware of. So, okay. and we'd return false otherwise. We haven't leveled up. Now with this, we need to know if we are at the level cap. So actually, what I would potentially do is I could switch this to a conventional for loop, but with some of the newer things that are in C#, it's actually another way I can do this. I can check table, and if I do _1, this accesses the last element. So that will always be true, but what we would say is at level cap is equal to if the last entry's level is not equal to our current one. Actually, sorry, if it is equal to it. So we are at the level cap if the last entry in the table matches our current level. So, okay, that works. Set level. Well, set level should go through each entry, and if entry level is equal to level, then we go current level is equal to that, current XP is equal to entry XP required, and then we can just exit immediately. Otherwise, we should throw an exception. We could go argument out of range is probably a reasonable one. Could not find any entry for level. We just indicate that. So, okay, we can add experience points and we can gain a level. We can start at a particular level. Getting the XP required for the next level, that's a useful one for us to figure out as well. And we just want to check, are there any other things? So we're already updating that. We're updating this. All of these ones are good. At level cap, when we go and set the level, we should probably use this exact same logic here, because you could be setting it to the level cap. So just to make sure we've got that properly updated. The other thing we could also do when you set level is we could actually have that just do an add XP of that amount. That way then, there's only one location where we're changing the experience points. And that makes it that there's less potential areas we need to check or fix if something's going wrong. So, okay, good. Getting the XP required for the next level. So what we would do is and we want to try and find what level we're currently at. So index 0, index is less than our level table. So table.count, increment that. So we're looking for if our table index level is equal to the current level. Well, one of the things we would do first is if we're at the level cap, we return, and this is something where I would return 0 because there is no XP required for the next level, or we return int.max value. Might actually be a more appropriate one, because 0 is an unlikely value, but there might be some weird circumstances where we get that. So let's return a massive value because it's unreachable. So if the index is matching the current level, then what we would do, and I'm going to actually set up entry here like that, just to make it so that we're not constantly having to look up the table by index. Likely when it builds the code, that's the kind of thing that would get optimized out, but it also makes it that by pulling it into another variable, there's less chance for us making errors, and that's actually the bigger reason why I often do it. It makes the code more readable, less chance of me making typos and mistakes, less chance of autocomplete introduced problems, just makes it a little bit safer. So what I would then access is, well, okay, that's where we're currently at. So we then could go, okay, well, table index +1, its XP required, minus our current XP, and then I return that. That's all I need to do for it. Otherwise, now if it fails, that means that we tried to, we're somehow at a level that doesn't make sense. It should never hit this end of this loop, because we're either at the level cap, in which case it gets handled this way, or we actually are at a valid level. So it should never run into this scenario. So this is where I'd throw this exact same exception. So exceptions are good for something where it's, in particular, where it's a case like this. This is never valid for it to get to this line of code. It's never valid for it to happen. So that's, I think, a good setup for that. So I've written a bit of code, so good to go back and check what errors we might have, which odds are we do have ones. So that should actually be our current level. So this could only happen if current level doesn't match an entry in the table. So that should get there, and we should then have no errors, which is good. So, okay, we've set up that one. Let's also set up our linear one while we're at it, so that we've got both and we can start to be working with these. So base XP translation. So again, we set up create asset menu. Now I will copy the one from here so I can just ensure that I keep consistency with the naming of them. So XP translation linear. Can do the same thing and let Visual Studio implement these functions for us. So a linear one means that it's based on an equation. So there's going to be two parts to a linear equation. One is an offset, so a base amount of experience points. The other is going to be essentially a slope, how rapidly it goes up. Now, where level 1 is at 0 XP, so that means we're going to look and see what we want to do, offset and things like of that wise. So I need to have int offset. I want to have, and scale, I would actually call this slope. So, okay, our current XP, we're at level 1, so there's going to be a little bit of an offsetting that we would actually do there. So we'll actually internally turn level 1, we treat it as 0. So, okay, offset, we might make that it defaults to 100. And then slope determines how rapidly it's going to be changing. So slope might be useful to have that be a float. We'll still round things to an integer, but it would be useful to have, I think, that being able to be a slope, just if we got very large level ranges. So good to have it as a float. So, okay, I might make that it is something like, so if we made it 50, I think is good to start with. So add XP. Well, we go current XP plus equals the amount. That much we know. But to get the XP for a particular level, that actually is something we're going to need a little helper function. Int XP for level. And what I would do with that is that's going to be, it will return, we do level minus 1 multiplied by the slope plus the offset. That's what we are going to return. Now we need, and I would always do this as a floor to int, so we always round down, so it's predictable. You could use ceil to int as well. In this case, I think floor to int makes a little bit more sense. So, okay, what we need to then check is, have we gone up in level? So, okay, let's work out what our new level would be then, because this is the other thing. We might have gone up multiple levels. Now with our translation table one, that's fine. It can handle going up multiple levels. It's a little bit more complicated in this scenario. So one of the things we could do is we could actually reverse engineer what our level would be. Because if we reverse the maths of this, so what I would do to reverse the maths of this, let's write this down here and we'll go through, and what we want to get to is this level being on the left-hand side. That's what we're trying to achieve. So if I subtract offset from both sides, then I get this, which looks better. If I divide both sides by the slope, then that's looking closer. And then adding 1, which again I would wrap this in brackets just so I'm controlling the order that things are happening in, plus 1, we end up with that. So I can turn this around and say current level is equal to this. Now we will initially get some errors there, that's okay. Can do a mathf floor to int of that whole chunk. Could actually also just do it of this chunk that I've got here, would be fine. And then, okay, I'm going to store that as new level. And then I can say, okay, well, if new level is not equal to current level, then we return true. But I might also put that in just a variable. So leveled up, if new level is not equal to current level, because then I return that value. We also need to have a level cap. So, okay, int level cap. So we can set that to 20. Now we need to check, okay, is that new level above 20? So we'd also chuck in our check here for if we're at the level cap, we return false, just so we don't keep doing that. Our new level, actually, we have to clamp that. So it has to be the min of that and our level cap. So now our leveled up one still is properly going to work. We can also, at level cap, is if new level is equal to the level cap. And I'm also then going to update current level is new level. And I might change this one here. So that should work to do the translation. Should get us our new level. Setting the level is actually pretty easy because we can use our XP for level function. So we can do add XP, XP for level. Now that could give us a value above the level cap though. So what would make sense is that we go mathf min like that, and I'm going to put that in here. Just so that we're never managing to push it above the actual level cap. So that looks good. XP required for next level. We can do the same logic. If we're at the level cap, we return int max value. Otherwise, because we've got that helper function, it ends up being XP for level, current level plus 1 minus current XP. So when you have an equation, it is in some ways a little bit simpler, but in other ways a little bit more intricate. So it is something where, can be really useful. And you might have multiple equations. That's the other thing that we could do, is we could do banks of equations for particular level ranges if we wanted. So, okay, so far, so good. With this, we want to have our XP translation system. So we're going to have our base XP translation, XP translation template, or maybe type might be a better way of doing it. And then we'll actually have the one we instantiate, because what I'll do is, and I would do this in awake, so it's there from very early on. I want to be able to go, well, XP translation, we instantiate that scriptable object. That way it gives us a unique copy per thing that has an XP tracker on it. That just makes that a lot easier. And I'm going to have a function here for add XP. Also want to have a function for set level. And these become really easy because they can just go, well, XP translation, add XP amount. Same thing here, set level, like that. We're ready to set up some UI and test this. So I'm going to create an empty object that is going to be for my character. I'm going to give them an XP tracker. And I'm going to create some data. So one of the bits of data is going to be the linear XP one, which has got values in there already. Then I'm also going to create a table one. Now, table one, we need to actually put entries in here. And what I'm going to do is, and the UI display is managing to actually get a little bit confused. So we're going to add in just each of our levels. Now we'll make the actual amount of XP pretty sort of straightforward. We're not going to make it too complicated with the amounts. Yeah, so I've actually got a bit of a UI bug there from Unity. It seems to be managing to not properly draw those elements, so that's less than ideal. So level 1 is 0 XP. Seems to be just that first element. So we're going to make these 200, 300, 400. I think you get the idea. This would also be something that you could, in theory, set up in a spreadsheet and import from that. So we've got our character. So I'm going to initially, we will use the linear one. And then UI-wise, I just want to set up some really basic UI. And we'll just also set this to a solid color so it's nice and easy to actually see. So we're going to have our actual character panel. Update our resolution here. So we're designing using the usual size that I would use. We'll set up another panel that will be our debug controls. And we'll make this so it has a button And not a drop down, but we will delete that and add in the button once it's brought in the Text Mesh Pro Essential bits. And get rid of that. So we're going to have a couple of controls. So we'll have add XP, add lots of XP, and then we will also have set level. So we're going to have a few different buttons down here. Add XP, add lots of XP, and set level, which will just have that set it to an arbitrary value. So debug controls, we want that panel to not be too large. That's plenty. We'll set up a horizontal layout group. Can control the height, but we don't want to force expand the width. Sorry, don't want to force expand the width, but it can control the height. So that looks good. Might give those a little bit of padding just to make it neater. So that's good. So character panel. Well, that's going to be offset by 100. And what I will do is, okay, got a few things that we're going to need. We want to have the current level. We want to have the current XP. And we want to have the XP to next level. So those are things that we want. So we're going to put in some placeholder text. Similar thing with all of these. Current XP. Allow plenty of space for that. And XP to next level. Again, that looks pretty good. So, okay, I'll put in a little sub panel just for this stuff. So level and XP that I'll put these under. And I'm going to just make this a smaller panel just at the top left here. 0, 1. That looks pretty good. So it can be 200 wide, maybe a bit larger actually. Might make that 400 wide. That looks pretty decent. Obviously, you know, with this is my focus is really on just getting some basic setup happening for it. So we can control the child's width, but not their height. That looks good. I will make this box darker. Will help it sort of stand out. And sizing of that, we will reduce that a little bit, but also still make that box a little bit wider. Just so we've got enough space for everything. So that looks pretty good. Okay, we want these actually doing things now. So, okay, I want to set up stuff. Now this could go into the actual XP tracker. Be handy to have, you know, we've already got the functions for adding XP and things like that. So what I might do is connect up all of these. So we will link them up to our character. So add XP is going to run the add XP function and it'll add 100. We might update that text. So add 100 XP, adding lots of XP. So that we might add in 500. So again, we'll change that to add 500 and set level. Again, we'll use that set level function. We set it to 10. Actually, no, we might go for 5, sort of a midway point. Set to level 5. So good so far. We need to have our displays linked up. So our XP tracker is going to need using TextMesh Pro. And we're going to set up here TextMesh Pro UGUI, current level text. This one will be current XP text. And then very similar thing, TextMesh Pro UGUI, XP to next level text. So I'm going to set up a couple of things for refreshing the displays. So we'll have a refresh displays that will run anytime we do things like setting a level, adding XP. Now adding XP we could check to see if it was successful and display also particular effects if we wanted them. But refreshing the displays is actually pretty easy because our current level text, well, that becomes current level, XP translation, current level. Our current XP text is almost identical. Current XP, and then we provide XP translation, like of that. Our XP to next level, we need to do a little bit more with that. So we would check, okay, well, if XP translation at level cap, we want to do something different. So what I would actually do for this is if we are not at the level cap, then our text becomes XP to next level. And we can just go, again, our usual XP required for next level. Otherwise, we'll just indicate that we are actually at the cap. So we'll go XP to next level at max. So we should have these displays working. We'll connect up the different bits of text. So we'll set up so our character is linking to these different ones. And what we're hoping to be able to see is when it runs, we get these populated, which we do. Those make sense. So if we add in 100 XP, that's worked. If we add in another 100, we should go up a level, which we have. And because it's linear, the amount to each next level will be the same. If I add 500, then we go immediately up a whole bunch of ones. Add another 500, we're at the max. So that's good. Now let's see what happens if I set it to level 5. So it doesn't actually reset it. So what we want to do is we actually need to make a slight change to our XP translation functions. So when we go and set the level, what we're going to do is go current level is also current XP is 0, at level cap is false. So we have to actually reset those entries because otherwise we are potentially adding XP that we shouldn't be. So we just need to reset everything back. Actually, current level should get reset to 1. Which we don't even need to reset current level, but I will in this case. Current level, set it to 1. That should mean that regardless of what level we're at, we can safely go and reset the level. So we'll test that. So if I add 500, I'm at level 9, and I can go back to level 5. So I was using one of the translation ones. Let's switch it over to using the table. So we want to check and make sure that the table one is working as well. So that looks good. Add in 100, good so far. So with that, so this is a case where, okay, current XP is at 200. We didn't level up, and so that means what we should have done with the table. So it is checking if the current XP is greater than or equal to the XP required, which it would have been. So that would have actually been different. So that should really have leveled it up. We'll test again and see if we add in a bunch more. So we're seeing it's not going and finding leveling up. So what we can look at and see is this actually should be finding the last one that it's greater than, because actually the early levels, it will automatically be greater than. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this search in the opposite direction. So index is equal to table count minus 1. And we search like that. Then we have our entry. So var entry is table index, like that. So we just search in the opposite direction. That should do the trick. We can then test this. And so, okay, we add in 100. We add the next 100, levels up. Levels up again, can add in 500, can go back to level 5. So we've got our system working for being able to add experience points, for having different translation functions that we've got in there, which is good. So with that in mind, we could then also look at setting up stuff for some basic stats. So what we could set up is, okay, character stats. And these stats should get told when the level changes. So I want to give these a function. So we might make this on update level, previous level, current level, just because it might be useful to actually get both through. And then what I'm going to do is, now the actual stats, I'm going to just set up a couple of arbitrary ones. We could go and add in a lot of different ones. And so what I'm going to do is we will have a protected int base stamina, like that. And that can be a protected set, and that might be 0, for example. Then we would have a public int for stamina, and that won't have a set function, though we could do potentially something with that. And that'll just return base stamina. But the reason for this is, and actually that base stamina might be useful for it to be public. The reason for having it in this is so that if I had equipment, what I could do is I could then grab the equipment and that would modify the value that gets returned here, or there might be temporary effects. So doing this approach of, okay, here's the value that's due to our, actual sort of level gains, things like that, and here's the one that is accessible for other things. So this can be public, but it also is something that's just affecting the base one. So that looks good. We would do a similar thing for health. Health Again, we set it up as a full property. So this would use stamina, and I'm going to set up a couple of things here. So an int stamina to HP conversion, or to health conversion. So I might make it 10. So every point of stamina gives 10 health. So that looks good. We need our stamina set up in terms of with the level. So, okay. Stamina, we might refer to this as base stamina offset. So this is an amount that's always present there. It might be, say, 10. And then we might have base stamina per level. So each level might add a certain amount to this. So that looks all right. So, okay, we can have our base stamina, we can have our health. We've got a function that runs when we update a level. So, okay, what I could check here is, well, our current level, I want to set our base stamina to be equal to our stamina per level. So our base stamina per level multiplied by the current plus the offset. So we've got that ticking over. What that means is our XP tracker needs to be able to tell the character that that's changed. So this approach, once I've got it set up, will make it fairly easy for us being able to link these two together. So we'll get our XP tracker. We want to give it an event. So we're going to bring in Unity Engine.events. We're going to set up so it has a Unity event that provides two integers, an on level changed. Set that to just a new one. Now, when we have started, we should actually go and update anything that's hooked into that. So at this point, on level changed, and what I'm going to do is it's going to say the previous was 0, and then it's going to give XP translation current level. So we invoke that. Now, when we go and add in XP, we do get told if it changed. So we'll do an F here, and if it did, then I can go and do a similar thing of on level changed, invoke. I'll need to keep track of the previous level. So we go XP translation, because we could have gone up multiple levels, so I do want to actually just save it like that. So we have previous level and XP translation current. So that's good. When we set the level, that's something where we should also go and change it here. So I will keep track of previous level, like that. And if previous level is not equal, because we could be setting it to the same one, so let's actually properly check. And if it's different, then we will run this. That should mean things like our stamina updating can then go, well, our level updating can change our stamina. So this is going to need some displays as well. So Text Mesh Pro, and I'm going to bring in, we'll have two ones, a Text Mesh Pro UGUI for stamina text, and a serialized field, another one for health text. And what we will do is when these get changed, then we can go, well, stamina text is equal to stamina, and we can just output that variable, like that. And we can do the same thing with our health text. Like that. So that actually should be, I'm going to rename that to max health, would be actually more accurate for what it is. That we should be able to just connect up once we've set up the UI for it. We'll need to link up our event here. So we link it up to that character script. When we go to character stats, we have the dynamic one here. So that's good. Our level and XP panel, I'm going to duplicate that, have a stat panel, which I'll offset by, what we do, minus, like that. So we would have stamina, max health, can get rid of that last one. So this would be stamina, like this, and health, like that, which we can just link those directly up so our character can control them. And I'm going to switch our character back to the other way, the linear one, just because it has more levels to it. We should see our stamina and health change. So those have updated. So it doesn't change yet. Now I level up and it's gone and changed. So we've got a system for managing experience points. We've then got stuff with our stats set up, and we've got derived stats. So we have stamina, that's a core one, stamina changes, and then we have a derived stat, health, from that. We've also set up our derived stats in a way so that if we wanted to add in temporary buffs, if we wanted to add in, character traits, if we wanted to add in equipment that affects this stamina, we've got a single point where we can go and inject those stamina changes that the rest of the code base sees. So it's giving us an architecture that we can follow, and we'd use this for any of our stats. So I've just shown it with one stat with stamina, but you could be using this for any of the stats that you might have. You could also set up different conversions. So we could have scriptable objects that control that translation. So just as we had table and equation-based ones for experience points, you could actually use that exact same setup for your stamina and health and things like that if you wanted to as well. Different characters could use different conversions, which means that it's very easy to sort of drive this with data and with scriptable objects there in particular, which can work really well. And those are further extensions that we're actually going to look at in future. So this is sort of the very early starting point where we're getting a couple of bits set up, but there's more bits that I want to be adding going forward that are from sort of RPG games, getting some more of those elements in there, things like equipment, stuff like that, so that we can start to flesh out more of a system that you could be throwing into your own code if you're wanting to, or using as a bit of a base for building on. So dive in and experiment with it. Look at setting up potentially other stats. Look at, if you wanted to, as something to try, you could try applying things like those translation tables to the stats. So you're using those to affect how stamina and things like that work, or adding in some temporary buffs are the kind of thing that you could add in there if you're wanting to experiment. Thanks folks, hope you found the video interesting and helpful. If you have, chuck in a like and subscribe, really helps out, it's really appreciated. If you're looking for the code for the project, the code is available up on GitHub, and I've put a link to that in the description below. You can freely use that code in any of your own projects, commercial, non-commercial ones, you're able to be using it. If you've got any questions, chuck in a comment below. And if you are trying to find other related videos, I do also have a video archive, which there's a link to that in the description. So that's a searchable archive of all of the videos that you can access. And finally, if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, I do have a Patreon, and there's a link to that in the description below. But until next time, bye.